Every Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movie ranked, worst to best. Of the movies adapting J.R.R. Tolkien's epic, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit books, not all are considered equals. Released in 1937 to immediate popularity, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit introduced Middle-earth, the literary fantasy realm, to rule them all. In 1954, Tolkien began expanding his mythology with The Fellowship of the Ring, the first part of his Lord of the Rings trilogy, finding even greater acclaim and enshrining the series as a culturally defining body of work. The Lord of the Rings has enraptured one generation after another for almost a century, but compared to most timeless novels, relatively few attempts have been made to translate Middle-earth onto the silver screen. Filmmakers struggled to conceptualize the sheer scale of Tolkien's words on screen, and even the Beatles, as high as they were, ultimately decided against filming a live-action Lord of the Rings. Though a handful of lesser-known releases came before, Peter Jackson's The Fellowship of the Ring marked the first earnest endeavor to turn The Lord of the Rings into a movie. Releasing in December 2001, The Fellowship of the Ring would change the landscape of cinema forever. Jackson followed up with The Two Towers and The Return of the King, and the entire trilogy was met with loud cheers, bundles of cash, and award ceremony recognition. Slightly more than a decade later, the director returned to Middle-earth for The Hobbit, which was also turned into a trilogy, not without controversy. 2024 saw the release of War of the Rohirrim, with The Hunt for Gollum planned as the following movie in 2026. After the filmmaking fraternity collectively deemed The Lord of the Rings impossible to adapt, animators tried their hand at bringing Tolkien's world to life in cartoon form with limited success. 1980's The Return of the King represents the absolute worst of the bunch. After previously adapting The Hobbit, Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass decided to turn Tolkien's climactic final book into a 2-hour animated adventure. Rankin himself would later describe the effort as not a very good film, which reveals all you need to know about this early Return of the King retelling. The tone is all wrong, the production leaves much to be desired, and the plot is far too condensed, resulting in a cartoon that doesn't even come close to honoring the source material. Believe it or not, Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings was the definitive Tolkien adaptation before Peter Jackson came along. Covering The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers, but oddly disconnected from Rankin and Bass, The Return of the King, 1978's The Lord of the Rings cartoon suffers from inferior animation, utilizing the rotoscope technique of tracing photographs of live-action actors. If other Middle-earth cartoons fell into the trap of catering to children, Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings took the opposite route, widely considered a cheerless drug trip let down by obvious production flaws and lackluster performances. An impressive achievement for its time, perhaps, but Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings is best described as a curiosity within the wider Tolkien tapestry. Worth a dabble, but handle with caution. Before butchering The Return of the King, Rankin and Bass fared somewhat better animating The Hobbit in 1977. Tolkien's more child-friendly novel lent itself to their format, and with considerably less material to cram in, The Hobbit didn't struggle uphill as hopelessly as its eventual sequel. Nevertheless, many of the same flaws apply. Tonally, The Hobbit is stuck peddling almost exclusively to youngsters, and the scattered plot leaves far too many glaring gaps, diluting what made J.R.R. Tolkien's first jaunt through Middle-earth so special. The voice cast, which includes Orson Bean, John Huston, and Theodore Gottlieb, gives admirable performances, but the visuals and dialogue possess a juvenile quaintness that undermines any attempt to authentically recapture The Hobbit's book magic. Peter Jackson's quest to turn Middle-earth into a cinematic behemoth redefined the fantasy genre, but the Hobbit trilogy was far less revolutionary. The final part, 2015's The Battle of the Five Armies, indulges in lengthy battles, but having already spun a single book into 2 lengthy movies, runs out of steam in the plot department. The Battle of Five Armies' true strength lies in its quieter moments. The resolution to Bilbo Baggins' journey and the conclusion of Thorin Oakenshield's attempt to reclaim Erebor. Those relationships between Hobbit and Dwarf give the Battle of the Five Armies its emotional core, but the lack of focus too often draws attention elsewhere. Meanwhile, conspicuous CGI padding weighs Peter Jackson's final chapter down, yet again highlighting the folly of extending The Hobbit into a trilogy. Whereas Jackson's The Lord of the Rings editions helped smooth the path from page to screen, The Hobbit's movie original elements don't play as nicely, and this is especially evident in the Battle of the Five Armies. Legolas looks out of place, Tauriel and Killy's romance comes across desperately forced, and Alfred proves a superfluous villain that adds to the bloat. There's real conflict between the gargantuan titular battle for the fate of Erebor and the arcs of the Hobbit's central characters. Nevertheless, Richard Armitage's outgoing Thorin performance has enough gravity for all 13 dwarves, and Peter Jackson still puts on the most spectacular battle sequences in town. The Hobbit trilogy's middle child, The Desolation of Smaug, is the entry most affected by Peter Jackson's 3-movie plan. Neither a beginning nor an end, The Desolation of Smaug lacks the Two Towers' luxury of being crafted as a bridging chapter, creating a hesitancy that never goes away. The gem in The Desolation of Smaug's crown is the dragon himself, portrayed in all of Tolkien's fearsome grandeur by Benedict Cumberbatch. As a fully CG character, Smaug rivals the Lord of the Rings Gollum for presence and personality, and his sequence with Martin Freeman's Bilbo, not the Sherlock reunion we expected, but still, justifies The Hobbit's movie treatment by itself. Bilbo matching wits with his fire-breathing foe is Peter Jackson at his dizzying playful best, a seamless marriage between action and character. It just takes so long to get there. The Desolation of Smaug's sheer volume of digital effects removes the tactile earthiness that grounded The Lord of the Rings. Thrown back into the action with Thorin's company of dwarves, there are detours into elven territory, Sauron's setup from Tolkien's wider writings, and an overly long exploration of Lake Town, all before Smaug has properly reared his shimmering head. And yet, weirdly, other opportunities for expansion go begging, such as Macaul Persbrandt's Bjorn, who gets a woefully short live-action shrift. The Desolation of Smaug also tests audience appetite for CGI. Despite mostly replicating the high quality expected from Weta, The Desolation of Smaug's sheer volume of digital effects removes the tactile earthiness that grounded The Lord of the Rings. Kenji Kamiyama's War of the Rohirrim is far from the best the Lord of the Rings franchise has to offer, but it's undoubtedly a fascinating entry into the franchise. While not the first Tolkien adaptation to be explored in animation, it's the first to utilize the anime style, offering a beautiful new lens for Middle-earth that's reminiscent of Studio Ghibli films. Not to mention, it's the first movie in the franchise not to be directly based on a Tolkien book, with War of the Rohirrim's story coming from the appendices of The Return of the King. War of the Rohirrim embraces the fundamentals of a Tolkien story, but it falls flat in one major aspect that even the Hobbit movies got right at times: characters. Hera is an inspiring protagonist, but her constant success in every idea and action she takes makes her less charming than those who preceded her. Opposite her is Wolf, a despicable yet predictable antagonist. War of the Rohirrim is far from bad, and its visuals are still awe-inspiring and offer an exciting return to Middle-earth, but it just doesn't have substance to match what's ahead. Though An Unexpected Journey attracted a mixed response upon release, its fortunes were hampered by the unenviable task of directly following Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy, whereas expectations were duly lowered ahead of The Hobbit's 2 sequels. In retrospect, there's arguably more to love in Bilbo Baggins' first foray. Martin Freeman gets his best opportunity to shine as Frodo's ring-bearing uncle, and early interactions between the disgruntled Hobbit and 13 equally disgruntled dwarfs, with Gandalf as referee, rank among the best scenes in the entire Hobbit trilogy. The Shire material is only outdone by Bilbo's fateful encounter with Gollum in the Misty Mountains, in which the Hobbit acquires the One Ring and plays a game of riddles with his perma-crouching pal. Their exchange is one of precious few scenes in The Hobbit that draws close to emulating Tolkien's tone and spirit. Though Bilbo Baggins' journey might have been unexpected, the awfully large gulf between The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings back catalog was very much expected. The high frame rate and overcompensation of CGI drown away any realism from Middle-earth, and it's obvious from the outset that Peter Jackson is reserving his best cards for the sequels. Azog isn't especially compelling or authentic as a villain, and there's an overwhelming sense The Hobbit is conforming to Hollywood convention far more than The Lord of the Rings. Even so, An Unexpected Journey is where the central tale of Bilbo and Thorin is given opportunity to breathe. The Shire material is only outdone by Bilbo's fateful encounter with Gollum in the Misty Mountains, in which the Hobbit acquires the One Ring and plays a game of riddles with his perma-crouching pal. Their exchange is one of precious few scenes in The Hobbit that draws close to emulating Tolkien's tone and spirit. Though Bilbo Baggins' journey might have been unexpected, the awfully large gulf between The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings back catalog was very much expected. The high frame rate and overcompensation of CGI drown away any realism from Middle-earth, and it's obvious from the outset that Peter Jackson is reserving his best cards for the sequels. Azog isn't especially compelling or authentic as a villain, and there's an overwhelming sense The Hobbit is conforming to Hollywood convention far more than The Lord of the Rings. Even so, An Unexpected Journey is where the central tale of Bilbo and Thorin is given opportunity to breathe.